on the English side of the border, and we're checking out the route of the English army north. Beyond me, the scant remains, but nevertheless significant and a prominent landmark of Wark Castle, Wark on Tweed, mustering point of the English army. This is Wark Castle, Wark on Tweed Castle, just a few miles on the English side of the border beyond Coldstream. It's mid-July, so this is a treacherous place to try and get onto. The weeds are so high and the ground and the stones are so unstable. It was originally a motte and bailey castle and then built in stone. Edward I stayed here on his many incursions north, but it was used as a mustering point for English armies. On the road to Bannockburn, Edward II and his army came from Berwick along the mighty river Tweed here, and they congregated here around Wark Castle. This would have been someplace in its day, and I would love to have gotten up onto the top there today just to show you how splendid a view it is. But it is treacherous, it really is treacherous, and some of the ground was giving way underneath my feet as I tried to get up there. I will come back, I will not be deterred, but in the autumn, once all this dies down and I have some sure footing. But such a phenomenal place. Look at this here. So straight down the Tweed Valley there. Straight down the Tweed Valley there. Rich in its salmon fishing and what have you. And a few miles as the Tweed goes upstream. Wark Castle. Nothing much remains, and if you come and searching it, the locals will tell you not to get excited. So unless you're like me and you have I'm sweating here, and you have a strong sense of place and you can build the place in your mind, it's well worth the visit. And it was such a prominent landmark on English invasions going north and Scottish raids when they came south. This is Wark Castle. I will be looking at more of the road north when English armies came into Scotland, and we'll be looking at the stops and the route along the way. But Wark on Tweed on a beautiful July day, a place which so many people drive past now or walk past. It's become an insignificant landmark, but a very important one back in the day. What I did find in amongst the undergrowth is Lady Catherine's Well, and it still has a bell in it, and it is well buried just on the way down to the River Tweed there. One local was kind enough to lead the way, help me and disturb some vegetation and reveal this ancient well. But fascinating place here at Wark on Tweed. And this place, even although King Edward I, King Edward II would have stayed here, King Edward III as well, these fields around here would have been surrounded by great armies, their tents, all their horsemen, waiting on the other retinues come north to Berwick and then to here, where they could join forces together, cross the Tweed, and make that dreaded invasion into Scottish territory. When I think of the English armies gathering here, coming along from Berwick, and also the ones who had made it here, they must have been a phenomenal sight. They really must have been in all their glory, and they never really expected to lose when they come into Scotland. And yes, there were a couple of occasions where they lost small battles and skirmishes, but when you look at something on the grand scale of Falkirk, and certainly on the grand scale of when they made their way to Bannockburn, the road to Bannockburn, and with all their emblems and their shields and their armour blazing and the coats of arms and knights riding under them, young knights eager for their first experience or their first few experiences in engaging an enemy. It must have been an amazing sight. They would have been camped all around here, all around the village. Nothing much is left off the stone at Wark. It's very difficult to traverse in this type of weather. I will go back in the autumn. But once they crossed the Tweed at Coldstream, we're going to take a look at that. And then they made their way up through Lauderdale to Soutra and onwards to Edinburgh. They must have been, I wonder, at what the Scots people and the local residents of the towns that they passed through would have made of them. Some of the abbeys which were torched and razed, they did not fare well when the English came to town. And also when they stopped at their various garrisons, Roxburgh and what have you, to rest, build supplies up and replenish themselves before moving into Lothian and onwards. But it must have been a phenomenal sight when they were here. Old comrades meeting up, campfires at night, just ready to make their way across the River Tweed, and never expecting to lose, expecting glory, expecting to fill their pockets, expecting to increase their lands, increase favour with their nobles, with the king. It must have been a phenomenal sight, and we will look at that train, that great army train that ventured up through Scotland in that fateful year of 1314. This here is the Leat Water. I'm in Coldstream at the moment on the Scottish side of the border. Coldstream, known as the first true border town. Now on this side of the Tweed here, so that's heading down to what is the modern day Coldstream Bridge. Now in medieval times, in the times of Edward I and Edward II, armies coming north, the ford was somewhere about here. Now I've wandered down to underneath the modern bridge, and that seems to me more like a better crossing point. This appears to be still quite deep, quite wide, and it's fast flowing. It may have changed since back then. We don't know. Rivers can change. But it said before the bridge was built, mainly so that they could get artillery over, and in those times of warfare, that certainly the medieval ford, the crossing point, was somewhere near where the Leat water met the great river Tweed. And this is the Leat water entering the river Tweed just where I stand here. But I've a suspicion that either just ahead there or just further round the corner was the medieval ford that the army under Edward II crossed en route on the road to Bannockburn. You know, the River Tweed is one of my favourite rivers, and I've just had an extremely interesting conversation with a local fisherman who's fished this river for 30 odd years. And there's nothing better than speaking to the locals to learn about the environment and the history that's taken place. But the medieval ford was near where the Leat water met the Tweed, the confluence of the two. And when I went up there, it seems deep. It doesn't seem any obvious crossing point. But he told me how much it had changed. It not only changed, but moved over the last 20 years. There's a tree that stands in that green. He says 20 years ago, that was about 80 or 90 yards from the edge of the Tweed. He says you're lucky now if that's 40 yards. Parts here that we're looking at, that's the guy up there fishing in the Tweed. Parts here that we're looking at, he says that gravel was not here 15 years ago, 10 years ago. So many of the bankings have been moved and washed away, and the course of the river changes over time, and this affects everything. So what was there 700 years ago is not blatant to see anymore. The landscape does change in many ways where rivers are concerned. And when I think of those thousands, 20 odd thousand of an English army crossing at that ford further up there, it's an amazing thing to think about them crossing that river. But he says, yes, the edge of the Tweed, if you're going to it, because it looked deep to me, that is deep. But he says you get out into the middle and it's only like 4 feet. 4 feet. So it's changed in many ways. It's actually crossable at that point where the medieval ford is thought to be. But just a valuable insight I thought I would share with you. I've been walking up and down the River Tweed today, quite some bit. I've been climbing unstable castle foundations. I've slipped, I've been stung by nettles. I've been walking on hard rock and unstable earth that's been given way. I've been walking along river banks and what have you. It's slipping down bankings and everything like that. But you know, I wouldn't have it any other way. To me, this is life. This is what makes me feel alive, bringing history to you and of course experiencing it for myself. Let's look at the next stage of the English invasion into Scotland. So when Edward left Wark Castle, approximately the 14th of June, and he crossed the River Tweed at Coldstream, he made his way up here. This is the Leader Water, so we are some 22 miles from Coldstream. He would have made his way up what is the modern A697 road, which converges further up there with the A68, which is the old Roman road of Dare Street. Coming down to the Leader Water, this would have been a handy bit for the army to water the horses, gather water, and stop and cross on the way up there towards Soutra. Now, what many people have thought over the years is that Edward's army, Edward II's army, invading Scotland that summer of 1314 was something of a B team. But it's simply not so. Yes, Edward II had political turmoil with the Earls of Lancaster and Wark, and they did not show, that is true, but they did send their minimum retinue. But what he did have was the Earl of Gloucester. Commanders, veterans like Robert Clifford, Humphrey de Bohun. He had the Earl of Hereford, who he had had a shaky relationship with, Henry de Beaumont. From the Scottish side, he had John Comyn, son of the murdered John Comyn by Robert the Bruce. The commander, Ingram de Umfraville, who held lands in Dunipace, a stone's throw from Stirling. And mercenaries. Edward had secured a lot of money to get the release of Giles de Argentan, one of the greatest and most feared warriors in all of Christendom at that time. So Edward would have felt secure with his army. He would have felt confident, overconfident even. It's reported that the entire English army were overconfident. The baggage train numbered something like 216 carts. Edward brought his own musicians, fiddlers, pipers. He even brought a travelling wine cellar. So this campaign, the objective to bring Bruce into open battle, was all done with a great deal of confidence and high morale. They were celebrating in style, and many people would have joined that army. Now it's reckoned that the army was over 20,000 strong, between 2,000 to 3,000 heavy cavalry with replacement horses, possibly more than 4,000 archers, and the rest infantry, foot soldiers that had been mustering at Wark. By the time they crossed the River Tweed at Coldstream, and they made their way some 22 miles up here and crossed the Leader Water, on their way to Soutra, they would have had Edinburgh in their sights. And to anyone passing, the display of that army must have been a sight to behold. Now, some of the retinue may have left the main body. They may have gone off to the abbeys. The abbeys were notorious targets for invading armies to be persecuted. They may have gone off to Roxburgh Castle to replenish them or get some more supplies from them or pick up a retinue. But this is where the main body of Edward II and his great English army would come when they were invading Scotland and they were on the road to Bannockburn. This is Soutra, and with the exception of the building behind me, this whole area, although nothing more remains, was a monastic outpost. There were something like 300 monks, Augustinian monks, lived and worked here. This was a medieval hospice. It was a home to wayfarers, pilgrims, those in need of rest, and it even harboured fugitives. It's strange to think now that walking in this field, that's all it is now, is where numerous buildings would have stood. This was a prominent landmark in medieval times, the Soutra Hospice. Much research has been done here. Much bloodletting was common back in medieval times, and much evidence of blood has been found on the site. But also rare plants from around the world, seeds from different parts of the world. They've found medicines containing opium and lard, which would have been used as analgesic ointments for open wounds and such like. I wouldn't have imagined that on the road to Bannockburn, the general health of the army at that point would have been good. But I wouldn't have imagined those who were in flight on return after the battle would have stopped here, because this is where the Scottish borders meets with Midlothian. And it would have seemed to me just to be a little too risky, with Scots in pursuit, being in hostile territory. I don't think this being a place of religious order would have stopped anything. We do know that bodies made it back to such places as Lauderdale, getting home, getting over the Scottish border, over the Tweed and into England. But when they were up here, they were well and truly into Scotland now. And what you can see is the Pentland Hills in the distance there. I live not that far from them. Arthur's Seat, that famous piece of volcanic rock in Edinburgh, straight ahead there. That was the objective, to get to Edinburgh. They would have secured extra supplies from the port of Leith at the time that would have come up from Berwick. If you just look way out to the east there, you'll see North Berwick Law, Traprain Law, the famous fort of the tribes of the time, the Votadini, and later a Roman fort. That is also visible in East Lothian. And coming up the coast towards Edinburgh, the objective, because King Edward II was in a hurry. He had to relieve Stirling Castle by Midsummer's Day. That was the objective. So he wouldn't have hung around here for long. Perhaps a few hours, perhaps one night. But onwards, down the road, through Pathhead, Dalkeith, Musselburgh, and on to Edinburgh. Edward II and his army would be here around the 18th of June. But he would leave Edinburgh by the 22nd of June. And by that time, it was only a few days before he'd make himself up through the territory of Falkirk, through the Tor Wood, where the Scots would withdraw towards the new park at Bannockburn, The days to the battle were counted. Even although Soutra has quite a deep history, quite a deep past, and this was even used as a place in medieval times to light beacons from, where it would alert the lands below to invading armies. No doubt it saw many sad times, and the people that lived back then would have had many memories of the people that came and visited here. But sad times go on. They are even prevalent now, as we're about to see. This building has remained because it is significant to the Pringle family. Quite a number of years later, between 200 and 300 years later, and the only visible building apart from any foundations that are lying out there. The only tangible thing we have to clutch at this small piece of history. And what you can see, you may think that much of it is eroding, and you'd be correct in thinking that, certainly about some of it. But there's even a more sinister reason for its erodement. When you look at all of this here, in this really old building, this old place, this place with an abundance of stories. And that reason is wanton vandalism. This is very recent, where these stones have been smashed up, that the information boards have been completely and utterly abused. This side here, not so bad, but nevertheless, someone who's just stopped by, or a group of people more likely who have stopped by and torn apart our efforts at preserving our history. In some ways, we rape the land, we pour concrete into areas that are important for our Scottish heritage, and another that is done through ignorance, and in other ways, what historic landmarks that we do have are abused, they're defaced, or they're torn down altogether. No doubt this part here will be rebuilt and redone, but this is the only physical landmark that reminds us of the Augustinian medieval hospice that was once Soutra. This video wouldn't be complete without paying tribute to the great, or once great, Tor Wood, which stretched right over the Denny Falkirk area on the road to Stirling. The Tor Wood was vast, and it was where Robert the Bruce prepared his army. And even although pockets of the wood remain and some remarkable features that stretch back way pre-medieval period, this was a sanctuary, and it is mentioned frequently throughout Scottish history. Now, the woods have changed. A drive through the area, or better still, walking it, is thoroughly recommended just to get a grasp of what the Tor Wood is and once was. But we're going to look at the Tor Wood, which is not far at all from the Falkirk road that the English would have travelled upon. And I'm pretty sure as well that when English came through the Tor Wood, they would have had scouts forward, left and right and to the rear, because it would have been a perfect place for an ambush at some points. But it would have been a mixture of forest, woodland, and also some meadow, because if Bruce was drilling his men to deal with knights, to deal with the charge of heavy armoured horse, he would have needed some space to prepare his men and train them up for that type of fighting. But let's take a look at what remains of the great Tor Wood. Now, what you can see before you is Tor Wood Castle. This is bang in the middle of the modern day Tor Wood. Now, the castle is 16th century. But what's interesting here, if you look slightly to the right of the castle, you'll see a couple of green trees just behind that white car. And then you'll see the roots, or the stump, of an old oak. That is the Wallace oak, or the Wallace tree. Legend has it that after a defeat in the north, William Wallace came here, had his headquarters here in the middle of the Tor Wood forest, and that even that he hid between the two great parts of the trunk of that oak. The oak is still there. We'll take a closer look at it later on. But like any tree associated with Wallace or Bruce, or famous tree of these times, they quickly fall victim to souvenir hunters. Back in 1770, or thereabouts, this tree was recorded as 22 foot high. But they've chipped away at it, but at least it's still there. It's still there. And it still shows some signs of life sprouting from the old dead tree. A phenomenal landmark, much older than the castle itself. There's something magical about walking through ancient tracts of woodland, and when you think back to a place that was vast in its variety of trees, abundant in its wildlife, and also how it was used by people back in ancient times. There's a mystery surrounds woods, and I'm sure even the men of the 14th century held such thoughts as they came across ancient landmarks that were used by people who had gone before them, and were long gone then. Never could they have envisioned a modern day life where we have very little of this left, and what we do have left is precious. It's important that we preserve our ancient places. It's important that we nurture and care for our ancient places, not only for ourselves, but for the people that are still to come, for those that follow after us. Walking through these woods, for me, the best time is early morning, 6 a.m. or later in the evening, when everyone's gone and the deer come down, the bird life start to sing that little bit more, and the wood is returned to them. I often wonder about the conversations of the soldiers under Robert Bruce, and the conversations that he had with his own men. Battle is no light thing, and in medieval times it was absolutely brutal. And on the front line, where many of these best fighters would have been, the prospect of death would have demanded immense courage, not only from one man alone, but also in building each other up. Fathers would have been with their sons, brothers, all of that together. And as they prepared here, and scouts came in and told them of the advancing English, the might, the elite army of its time, yes, they would have been well prepared, mentally and physically, that the hour had come to go to work for their freedom, for their way of life, and for the generations to come after them. Another magical feature of the Tor Wood, more difficult to see because the ferns are high, is this ancient brock. This is the Tappic brock. This is more like something that you would see in the far north of Scotland. High, sitting in the midst of the Tor Wood. What an absolute gem this is, hidden deep in the forest. I would have no doubt, if men were to camp in the forest back as they prepared in 1314, that they would have at least chosen this as one of their campsites. Bruce and his men may have sat here themselves, laughing together, eating together, sleeping together, going over what had to be done. This is truly one of Scotland's wonders. The Tappic brock. What a magical place. So I'm not going to go through all of these ferns here, but it really is ancient monument, and something, just as I was saying, that should be cherished because it's part of our history, our identity and our culture. The Tor Wood, what remains of it, which is only a tiny slice of what it once was, it's truly worth a visit. It really is, and you can see why outlaws, freedom fighters and broken men why they would have felt secure here and used this as a base. What a place this is. It really is. It's been some years since I was here. I was here back with my Dutch Shepherd dog back in the day, and I have a great picture of him on the top here. But I can just imagine Bruce's army here, or certainly parts of his army, where the experienced were drilling the new people, preparing their minds for battle, preparing them mentally, building their confidence for what was about to come. And once he had word of the English advance coming into the Tor Wood on the 22nd of June, he would have withdrawn just up the road, a short way towards Stirling, to wait in the ground he prepared for the English army there. But this here is a unique ancient landmark of the Tor Wood. This magnificent broch, where it's well worth coming back here in autumn when all this has died down. If you're like me, and the stories in history, the tales that we've come to know, along with the myth and legend, stirs the imagination. You get a real sense of place when you come into these ancient wild places. You can see where tales of Robin Hood and outlaws living in the forest, coming out of the forest to do their deeds and retreating back in here. And personally, I think there's a big correlation between the legend of Robin Hood and the real life story of William Wallace. And of course, we have the Ettrick Forest, the Selkirk Forest, which is also famous with William Wallace hiding out there. But here he certainly was. He certainly was here. And Bruce would have been here on many occasions as well. Many secret meetings would have been held in here when English garrisons had a hold on various parts of the country, certainly in Falkirk and in Stirling. But to walk through these woods, to walk in the footsteps of the past, gives you something that the history books cannot give you. I think when the hour had arrived, when word was that the English were a very short while away and Bruce withdrew from the Tor Wood, that he knew his hour had come. I don't think he doubted himself. I don't think he was that type of man. I think most of his energy would have went into building the confidence and the self-belief of his men, building their belief in him, because he knew he could win. And when you have an army who are full of self-belief, who are fully confident in their leader and will follow him, sometimes that is as good as a battle that's well won. As long as the strategy is sound, they're prepared, which Bruce was. I think that none of that Scots army doubted what they were about to do and what they were about to accomplish. Most of all, King Robert de Bruce. So this is Tor Wood Castle, and I've just had the privilege of speaking to the owner, Gary. He has a labour of love here, at doing this place up. And 15th century castle. There's his collie Doug there, just looking at me. And look at the work that's involved here. So he's looking at maybe a 5-year time period. But last time I was up here, there was archaeologists digging around here. And there's a Roman well within there. There's quite a lot of Roman works around here. So this Tor Wood has an absolutely fascinating history throughout all the centuries, throughout everywhere. And even although this castle is 16th century, sit here bang in the heart of the Tor Wood. It's a fascinating place, a fascinating area. But what I would like to show you as we head over towards the cattle here. Some archaeological excavations here, which were underway last time I was here. Lots of outer buildings. This tree in front of you, if you look at the drawings, the paintings, the illustrations of Wallace's tree, this is either a replica or it's the tree itself, and it's beautiful to see that some of it is alive. And it's said in the heart of Tor Wood Forest here, this gnarled old oak is part of William Wallace's history and of the Scottish Wars of Independence. Have a look at the illustrations. But as I say, it's fallen victim over the year to souvenir hunters. And complete and utter respect would be to leave what's left of this tree alone to thrive. Now what we have in front of us, wind turbines, grazing lands, would once have contributed to the great medieval forest that was the Tor Wood. Hello, son. Hello, son. Attaboy. Attaboy. We've seen how the English left Soutra, possibly camping there for the one night only, and making their way towards Edinburgh. Staying in Edinburgh, and around the 22nd of June, leaving there. And possibly the greatest march in terms of distance of the whole campaign to Falkirk, some 23 or 24 miles. The cavalry are out in front. Now, the Tor Wood is way behind me. That's stretched from the northern side of the Carron Water straight up through Falkirk, a vast forest, the Tor Wood, an ancient forest, harbouring William Wallace and outlaws, and given refuge to broken men throughout a long time. But the army would have come through the great Tor Wood forest, and Bruce was drilling his troops here. They practiced in the Tor Wood forest. So now we're emerging from the edges, the fringe of the Tor Wood forest towards Stirling. Bruce would withdraw. He would have had his scouts out, searching them out. The cavalry would have been well ahead of the infantry, and then you have the wagon trains, over 200 of them, with their supplies, many of them possibly replenished at Edinburgh, as they make their way through the Tor Wood, emerge from the Tor Wood towards Stirling, with Stirling in sight, and Bruce with his division waiting at the new park. Edward Bruce in Douglas would lay behind in the middle of the dry field, and Thomas Randolph would be closest to Stirling Castle.
This is exceptionally overgrown and rough footing up here, but nevertheless beautiful. There's nothing I like better than to get into these lands. And what's happening now is we're above Pleen, the town of Pleen, and the Falkirk Road is way down that way. And as you're looking for that, there you can see the start of the Ochils over there. As we wade our way through this, I'll just jump over the other side here. As we wade our way through this, the woodland starts to thin out, as it would have done back then. They've left the depths of Tor Wood forest, which there would have been a road through. I'm sure at autumn time, once the leaves have fallen from the trees, you'll get a good view through there from Stirling to Stirling. But this is their final journey, their final few miles ahead, before they would engage in the first of the fighting.
I often wonder what went through Bruce's mind and the mind of his commanders and his men once their scouts gave them word that the English were fast approaching. So of course the English were stretched out many miles, a good 7 miles long approximately, and with the cavalry at the forefront, the dreaded cavalry, Gloucester's division, Clifford and Beaumont. Lots of infantry left further behind in the baggage train to come up after that. When Bruce decided to withdraw, it's time. This is what we've prepared for. So he'd prepared the ground at Bannockburn, and while the English were on the road to Bannockburn, he certainly would have had them scouted from Edinburgh anyway, all of their movements. And I do believe that Bruce certainly resolved to fight, and the reason I believe that he resolved to fight and not attack on one day and then withdraw is that he had a very specific plan to put in place. He believed he could win, and he instilled belief in the men that they could win, and that's extremely important. He was a charismatic man, a charismatic leader, a great warrior, and a very astute man when it came to battles. Ever since Methven, the Battle of Methven in 1306, and the mishap at Dalry in the King's Field after that, Bruce had not lost. He had lost everything a man could lose, including men, family, any powerful positions that he had, and he crawled his way back from nothing, from impossible odds, and all of a sudden he finds himself with the English army coming on the Falkirk Road below, chomping at the bit because they know that Bruce is close. He's nearby. So he's taken himself off to guard the entry to the new park, and he stationed his commanders at the other places. So that the sole objective on that first day is to deny the English access to the new park and the dry field. And he was successful in doing that, and I believe that he had firmly resolved to fight in the second day. I don't think it was a rash decision that he got the men up at the crack of dawn, at the earliest of hours, and they marched out of the wood, down through Balquidderock Wood, into the Carse, and where it said that the English were taken by surprise, they mounted in great alarm. They were unprepared. They had been partying the night before, and they did not expect. No one took the fight to the English like that before. No one took the fight to heavy cavalry, apart from the Battle of Courtrai with the Flemish, and maybe something was learned from that. But the English would never make that mistake again. But I can only imagine when the English are coming up here on the road to Bannockburn. It's a long toil, 23, 24 miles, and the army would have been stretched out. But armies have covered greater distances in their times. You just need to look at some of Edward I's campaigns into Scotland, and pre-Edward I, all the way back to Roman times. The Romans were notorious for covering distance quickly. But I think now that the hour had come, the English certainly did not have it in their minds at all to contemplate losing a battle to the Scots. It had been a long time before anything like that had remotely happened. But Bruce knew he could win. And Bruce had an extremely close relationship with all of his commanders, with Douglas, with Randolph, with Keith, with all of these people, his brother, Edward. Whereas the English were in discord. Gloucester, Hereford, they were already butting heads for who had certain rights in the army. No one can question the courage of Edward II, but what is questioned is his military head, his stratagem. It's often said that had Edward I, his father, commanded the army, it would have been an entirely different story. Would it? Maybe, maybe not. Bruce was certainly smart enough, and as I've said in previous films, I think Edward I saw a likeness of himself in Bruce and saw qualities in Bruce as a military commander and an effective leader who could draw men to him that Bruce spelt trouble. Bruce was not a walkover. He spelt trouble, and I think he was just about now to put his plan into action and just await the English entry to the new park on that first day, where Gloucester's division would take him on and Clifford and Beaumont would travel via the way below the dry field of Balquidderock, between there and the Carse along the way, and they would come up to try and relieve the castle, and they would meet Randolph and skirmish with him there and be repelled. But it's been a great journey travelling from the other side of the Tweed. I just wish I'd made this video as beginning in Newcastle or Newminster or places before that, but can't cover it all. But to imagine what the Tor Wood was like back then, to imagine what the landscape was like back then. We have small pockets of the natural world that are left, the descendants of woodland and forestry that was there back then. And we need to use our imaginations of what the land and the terrain was like, how it's changed, and also, more importantly, what are invariants for the period, what hasn't changed. And there are still recognizable features both of the land and the human-made landmarks that contribute to that time and place. But the English have now reached within a few miles. Successive videos will tell you about the battle at Milton Ford, about the battle with Randolph, and about the possible skirmish as they tried to get between Milton and Halbert's bogs that were defended by Edward Bruce. And there are more than a few films depicting the battle unravelling on day 2. But thank you for joining me on this journey. It's not been an easy one to do because of modern development, so trying to paint a picture for you of the terrain, the land that the English army travelled through on the road to Bannockburn. And also, let's not forget, for those who did make it out of the battle, how hostile that territory would have been on the way back. And it would not have been an easy journey. King Edward himself was pursued by James Douglas for a long way, and it's only because they had groups in numbers that they were harassed more than any fighting started. The safest way for any English to retreat from the battle would have been in groups and staying away from the towns and villages where they could, and trying to make it home discreetly. Not all of them would. Some would be killed on the way. Some would be killed by your men and women, showing no mercy to a hostile invader. And some would make it back. Some would relate their stories to Lauderdale and various other chroniclers as they made it back to their homeland. Some would never be heard of again. The nameless and faceless people that we'll never know, who took part in the battle, died in the battle, escaped from the battle, and lived out their days back home with memories that we will never know about, that they would take to their graves. This has been an absolute pleasure filming this. It's always an experience for me to get out there into the land. I love the land. I love walking the ground. I love walking the country. This has been the English road to Bannockburn.